Hi everybody, I'm Paul from Bleak Winter Media, and I'd like to talk to you today about doing astrophotography on a budget. Now, you hear all the time budget astrophotography, but most of the time when people talk about budget, they're talking about spending $2,500 instead of $5,000. And there are many people, if you go on forums and elsewhere, that say you can't really get into this hobby for under $3,000. Well, I kind of beg to differ with that. And part of the reason is because I am 67 years old and I've been doing astronomy for 59 years. I've been imaging for 15 years. And before that, I actually took pictures through my telescopes, not like I do now, using cameras. They weren't particularly successful, and that's why I love the digital revolution. But the bottom line is, I've done this for a while, so I know something about it. And when I see people saying, oh, you got to buy a Takahashi and pay $7,000 and then get a $16,000 mount, well, that's great. And if you can do it, please do it. Definitely makes life a lot easier. But for those of us that don't have that kind of money to throw around, then I think it's important to understand you can get into astrophotography and you can do it on a budget. So the first thing I want to show you is actually this scope. For those of you that may not be aware, this is an Orion ST80. ST stands for short tube. And it is like a 400 millimeter or focal length, 80 millimeter objective lens. And it actually works pretty well for astrophotography. Mine happens to have a pretty good focuser on it. Some are not as good as others. And one thing I found out, I haven't had to do it on this one, there's two little holes. There's one here and there's one here. And in that hole is an Allen screw. You can put in a hex wrench and tighten it down if your focuser is loose. And what it does is there's a little pad in there of, I think it's plastic material, so it slides in and out. And you can move that down and put a little more tension on the focuser. However, if you notice, I'm pulling pretty hard and I really can't get this to move. That's pretty important to have a good focuser for your astrophotography. So I lucked out on this one. This one works pretty well. And I have used this for a grab and go scope, just to take it out and look through every now and then. I've also used it primarily as a guide scope, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But the thing is, you can buy a tube like this for about 120 bucks from Orion. If you want the rings on it, especially these adjustable ones, you're going to have to pay at least 50 bucks for the rings. But really, for under $200, you can get this telescope with the rings, and you can use it for a grab and go. Or last night, I went out and used this to do some major imaging. Had the Crab Nebula, the Moon, and also M42, or the Great Nebula. And they came out really well, and I will show that in my next video. So this is a viable option to get started in astrophotography on a budget. And one of the cool things, the shorter the focal length, the more forgiving the telescope is. So in other words, if you have a 10-inch f10, with some ridiculously long focal length, you've got to have a really good mount. You have to have great guiding, or the stars are all weird. This one has about, it's like 2.5 arc seconds per pixel or something. And so basically you can have 1.5 pixel wobble or 2 pixel wobble, and it won't be that noticeable on the pictures that you take. So they don't always tell you that, but one of the reasons why so many people start out with these small refractors doing astrophotography is because they're much more forgiving than the longer focal length telescopes. I want to show you this one. I just got it today. I have not had a chance to use it, but this white scope under here is an Astrotech AT70ED. Now this one is an achromatic refractor. That means there's two elements in it, and the two elements correct two colors. So you have the blue or the purple color that's not well corrected. So what happens is when you look at a bright star, or especially something like Venus, you'll see a blue haze around it, blue or green, just depends. And a lot of people, that just drives crazy. It doesn't bother me too much. But I grew up with these kind of telescopes. So to me, using a telescope like this and having the blue halo is just not that big a deal. But other people, it drives crazy when they have that. So this ED is extra dispersion glass. And what that means is there's only two elements in here. So there's two lenses. But they correct for most of what's called chromatic aberration. Or false color is the other term for it. And so for $300, you can get a 70 millimeter refractor that will give you absolutely stunning visuals, so I'm told, and so all the reviews read, but also good astrophotography as well. You might still have a little bit of blue fringing around long exposures, around brighter objects, but that's easily removed in post-processing or the software that you can get. So this one has a guide scope here, and this guide scope I got on Astromart used. And by the way, Astromart is a great resource. I paid $15 a year to go on there and have saved hundreds of dollars buying stuff over the last 10 years on Astromart. So I bought this from a guy on Astromart, and I use it as a guide scope. Well, this particular guide scope is a 60 millimeter refractor. It is also just an achromat. It's not an ED. Some people do spend and buy something like this telescope for their guide scope, but I don't know what the purpose would be. Your software doesn't care if there's a purple fringe around everything. So this is a ZWO ASI 120mm. What that really means is this is an entry-level CMOS imager. And when it first came out, I think I paid $160 for a 120 MC. Then I paid like $135 for a 120 mm. And then I bought this one on Astromart for $100. And if you can find them, these work really well as guide cameras, especially in these short focal lengths. So this one has a helical focuser, which means that it actually, let's see if I can get it screwed in here. I think I'm going the wrong way. It actually, instead of screwing in and out like this one does or this one does, this one turns so you can actually turn it and focus it very precisely so you can get a good focus on it. Also, this particular Astromart did not come with a dovetail, which mounts on your mount. So I went ahead and spent $30 to buy this one. I like this one because you can slide it back and forth. And I can already tell you that this will have some pretty serious balance issues when you put it on a mount, just because of all of this stuff and this camera sticking out the end. The other thing is you can put one of these on. This is my Canon Rebel T5 that I paid $125 for from eBay. So if you take a T adapter here and put this on your camera, you can just screw it in. Hang on. And you have an instant astrophotography camera. I can get it to actually screw into this one. I don't think it likes it too well. But anyway, this is, let's try that again. Well, that's news. This one won't fit in there. I know it fits on this one because I took some pictures this morning using it. But anyway, you can set this in. It connects into your camera like this. And basically, you can use your DSLR quite easily. These things now are relatively cheap. I say relatively cheap. They are in, I bought this one, I think it was $125, $140 for a T5. I had a T3 that I paid $100 for. A lot of times people tell you too, oh, you've got to send them in and have the filters taken off and all this kind of stuff so you can do hydrogen alpha. if you're just getting into astrophotography, don't worry about that stuff. Basically, you can take some pretty cool pictures just with a DSLR. And so I would encourage you, again, not to spend a ton of money, but use whatever you have. In fact, they're a little harder to come by now than they used to be, but you can actually get an adapter that you can clamp on your telescope, and it holds a little digital camera up to the eyepiece. There's also, and this is a lot more popular these days, you can get a cell phone holder that will actually hold your cell phone to the eyepiece of a telescope and be able to take pictures. There's at least one guy that I know of who is using his Apple cell phone and taking phenomenal deep space photos with it, because you can really control an Apple. And the phone I'm using to record this is a Samsung A52, which is a scaled down version of an S21. It has 68 megapixels, so it can actually take fairly decent photos, and you can set it to do, I think, 10 seconds, and you can even set it to repeat, taking 10 seconds over and over again. And that makes a pretty good camera to use on your telescope. So just to recap, this is, for under 200 bucks, you could buy one of these, ST80, and get it new. And if you can find one on Astromart, or there's also Cloudy Nights, also has a sale thing. If you can find one, you can probably get it for 100 bucks used. And it's a good intro level scope, especially if you want to use colored filters and use it with a monochrome camera, and then you can shoot through those 3 different colored filters and do color imaging. This telescope is $300, and it takes really great pictures that are pretty well color corrected. But the thing about this, the focuser is outstanding, and the fit and finish are really good as well. So, and by the way, this finder scope did not come with this telescope. I found this one out in my garage. This came off my 6-inch Celestron refractor, and I really didn't like this particular finder. But for this telescope with a over 1 degree field of view using a camera, in fact, is using this camera, and more if you use a DSLR, it's not as, you don't have to have it quite as accurate as what I did on the 6-inch. So let me speak about this particular camera. If you really want to get more into astronomy, this is an ATIC 414, yes, 414, I'll get it. ATIC 414EX CCD camera. So it's not a CMOS, it's an older camera. It takes a little longer, about a second, to upload to your computer, maybe a second and a half. But for astronomy, it's really, really good. And especially for the photometry that I do. And photometry is where you take a picture of the stars and you measure the brightness of a variable star, a changing star. And then you try to figure out what's happening on that star when you look at a light curve from it. And so this works really well. This is a filter, a manual filter wheel. These run about 100 bucks. They're not super expensive. And even though it isn't ideal for this, I wish I had a mechanical or a digital one. I do have this loaded up with photometric filters that I use on a regular basis. So this is really phenomenal. But I wanted to show you something here. It's a phenomenal buy. It's a bargain. This is a finder scope that I have used on this telescope for about the last 6-7 years. I made this one, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. But I just wanted to recommend this. This is not as cheap as it used to be. When I bought this, and I believe it was 2016, so it's been a little bit. When I bought this, 6 years? Yeah, 6 years. It was 199 bucks. It was an open box, which means somebody returned it, but they never even took it out of the box. They apparently opened it up, didn't like something, packed it up and sent it back to the company I bought it from. And so the thing about this one, this is just a small achromatic refractor. It's a 4-inch. It's a fairly short focal length. It's an f6.5. But the thing I really like about it, it's heavy, it's very well built, and the focuser is outstanding. The only complaint that I have, and a lot of people have, is the focuser does not have graduations on it so that you can reset your focus easy. It's not a real super handicap as far as I'm concerned, but it would have been nice to have it. This Astrotech does have that, so it'll be a lot easier to reset your focus when you get it. My problem with this one, I had to take it out of service because I don't know if it's something I did or what happened, but the objective has looks like a area that the coating's gone bad, or that the I don't know, the piece of chipped off or something like that, and it's actually affecting the image. So I'm not in negotiations. I'm just talking with Explore Scientific, and by the way, they have really great customer service. Just putting a plug for them. They're not giving me any deals basically, but anyway, so I'm going to send this back and get it repaired, and then be able to use it for certain things as well. So these are just some things here, and I wanted to show you this because this was on that telescope I just had. This is an old 70 millimeter, I believe, maybe 60 millimeter binocular that never worked right. It was pretty messed up and I couldn't adjust them. And so I went to the local hardware store and I bought this piece. It's actually 2 pieces glued together. Then this I picked up on eBay for 20 bucks, shipped from China. It's also a helical focuser, so you turn it and you can focus it very precisely. And I really did a lousy job on this one. This is not lined up correctly and the stars are kind of wonky looking. However, it guides amazingly. So I think I spent probably 20 bucks all told. And I already had this binocular here, or this ocular, I should say. And basically, I have used this quite a number of years very successfully. So this is another option, is making your own refractor, or like this, using something you already have that's not working right, and you can turn it into a pretty good guide scope. So here's the thing. Yes, spending a lot of money in astrophotography makes it a lot easier. You can just plug everything in. The big thing now is to have an onboard processor that sends everything right to your computer, and there's not wires and cords everywhere. However, I've just found that if I use wires, even in the winter when it's really kind of a headache because they get stiff, the bottom line is they're cheap. The second thing is they're very reliable. Seldom do you have a wire that goes out, but I don't know how many times I've had Bluetooth drop out or Wi-Fi go down or whatever, and I don't really have those problems when you just use a wired setup. So even though it'd be great to have all that stuff, the bottom line is you can still do astrophotography cheaply if you just keep your eye out, keep your eye on the used market as well, and all of that. So the next video, I will show some mounts that I have, because the mount really is the most important part of astrophotography. Though I will say this, I picked this up just recently. This is a Magnus VT300, and I picked it up primarily to use for some 20 by 80 binoculars, the Celestron binoculars, and I just needed a heavier tripod, but I couldn't afford to go spend $500 or $600 on a really, really great tripod. This one that I picked up works pretty well for this, and the thing I like about it is it does hold up to about 10 pounds. It says 15 in the literature, but it holds about 10 pounds pretty well. So I could take this telescope, put it on this mount, and I know it works because I did it this afternoon to test out the telescope. And I could take pictures of the night sky. I could do the moon. I could do, possibly some planets, that sort of thing, just with that kind of mount. No tracking involved. It can be done. It's just harder to do, and it takes a lot more experience, or a lot more experimentation and experience to make it work. The other thing is, with these short focal length telescopes, you can get a 1 or 2 second image on a fixed tripod like this. So if you took 4 or 5 boom, 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 2-second images, then move it back so that it's centered again, like if you're looking at a bright star or an object, you get it centered again, take 6 or 7 pictures, center it again, and then you use deep sky stacker. You can stack them up and end up getting pretty good shots. And again, it's a lot harder. It takes a little more than doing a 2-minute DSLR or a 2-minute exposure with a camera like this. But the bottom line is, it can be done. And give it a shot. Take whatever camera you got, go out and play with it. With these digitals, you can take 20 gazillion pictures and you don't waste any film. I remember trying to shoot in the night sky with a film camera, and what a headache. Because I think out of the 2 rolls of 36 film that I shot, I got 3 pictures that were worth something. And even then, they weren't very good, but they at least showed what I was trying to do. So the bottom line is, you can do it if you take time and energy to experiment, to try, and don't get discouraged. If you post on a forum, people will tell you you can't use one of these to do color imaging, and I beg to differ. You can use one of these for color imaging. In fact, there's a really good video on YouTube of a guy that takes that and takes great color pictures with it using a one-shot color camera. So again, it can be done. It's just a little bit harder. There's more post-processing, and it takes a lot more experimentation to see if you can get it right. Well, we'll see you again on the next video of budget astrophotography. Have a great day.